Does recognizing the fact that you've sinned make you a converted individual? We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about other things in this section of Exodus because we are reading through the books of the law, Genesis through Deuteronomy, over the course of this year. I'm Daniel Kaplan. I'm here with my father, Dr. Kaplan, and this is Wake Up to the Bible. Now, today we are going to read Exodus 9:17 through 35. I'm going to read from the Robert Alter translation, and then we'll discuss what we have read. You still block the way to my people, not sending them off. Look, I'm about to rain down very heavy hail at this time tomorrow, the like of which there has not been in Egypt from the day of its founding until now. And now send, gather in your livestock and everything you have in the field. Every man and the beast that will be in the field that are not taken indoors, the hail shall come down on them, and they shall die. Whoever feared the Lord's word among Pharaoh's servants sheltered his slaves and his livestock indoors. And whoever paid no mind to the Lord's word left his slaves and his livestock in the field. And the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the heavens, that there may be hail in all the land of Egypt, upon man and upon beast, and upon all the grass of the field in the land of Egypt. And Moses stretched out his staff over the heavens, and the Lord let loose thunder and hail, and fire went along earthward. And the Lord rained hail on the land of Egypt, and there was a very heavy hail, with fire flashing in the midst of the hail, the like of which there had not been in all the land of Egypt from the time it had become a nation. And the hail struck through all the land of Egypt, whatever was in the field, from man to beast, and all the grass of the field did the hail strike, and every tree of the field did it smash. Only in the land of Goshen, in which the Israelites were, was there no hail. I think that's the end of that section. Nope. And Pharaoh sent and called to Moses and to Aaron and said to them, I have offended this time. The Lord is in the right, and I and my people are in the wrong. Entreat the Lord, and no more of God's thunder and hail, and let me send you off, and you shall not continue to stay. And Moses said to him, as I go out of the city, I shall spread out my hands to the Lord. The thunder will stop, and the hail will be no more, so that you may know that the earth is the Lord's. And as for you and your servants, I know that you still do not fear the Lord God. And the flax and the barley were struck, for the barley was in bud, and the flax was in ear, but the wheat and the emmer were unripened. And Moses went out from Pharaoh's presence out of the city, and spread out his hands to the Lord. And the thunder stopped, and the hail and the rain were not sluiced earthward. And Pharaoh saw that the rain and the hail and the thunder had stopped, and he continued to offend, and he hardened his heart, both he and his servants. And Pharaoh's heart toughened, and he did not send off the Israelites, just as the Lord had spoken through Moses. All right. So we have the hail, which is very dramatic, because not only is it a dramatic hail like they have never seen, but it also causes fire, right? And ice and fire are not exactly something you see together most of the time. It is a deliberate violation of nature, and perhaps you could argue this would be the first one that would be very difficult to come up with a non-supernatural explanation. Obviously, the magicians already at this point have acknowledged the supernatural explanations, but perhaps you could have argued, for the river, maybe it's like in the Ten Commandments. It's like there was a red clay, and and then of course that makes the frogs, so that's kind of connected, and then the frogs might have brought out bugs, and then the lice, and then maybe you could say, well, the ticks is what killed all the livestock, right? So all of them kind of fit in with each other, as long as you can explain the weirdness of the Nile at the beginning, right? Whereas this, ice and fire, like, really, that's not a thing. That does not happen. Although I guess, lightning can cause fire, but still, I would say we're getting closer to things where it's a little bit tougher to make the case.
Yeah, and in the Ten Commandments also, the weather was not even conducive. All of a sudden, the hail comes.
Right. You shall see hail from a clear sky. Yes. No, that's true.
I'm trying to get to where Pharaoh makes that comment, because it doesn't come across as effectively with Alter.
Where he says that he was a louse?
Right.
That's 27.
That after the hail?
Yes. Well, yes. It's verse 27 is what I have.
Yeah, he says...
what do you have?
He says, I've sinned, chatati, he says, I've sinned. What does altar say?
I have offended this time.
Okay, and then he says, he said the Lord is righteous, and I and my people are wicked. That's Rishaim. He says the Eternal is Sadiq, and we are Rishaim. We are wicked.
Yeah, he says the Lord is in the right and I'm in the wrong. And the reason why he says,
I wonder why he tones it down.
He says the terms in the right, Sadiq, and in the wrong, Rishaim, reflect legal usage, is what he says. That's where he gets it. That's what he says. Fan.
I think he's trying to make Pharaoh not quite as humble as he comes across if you're just reading the Hebrew and taking it literally.
Which to some extent,
and he may be right.
Which to some extent undermines my question, right? Because the question you have with this is commonly out there in the world, one of the big things you hear is one of the biggest things that you should do in order to become a converted individual is, well, you have to admit that you are a sinner and that God ultimately is in the right. However, I think this story reveals that's not the full picture. You need more than that.
Of course, yeah.
Because it does seem like Pharaoh does acknowledge that, but he does not want to change the type of person that he is, right?
Yeah.
Now, the problem is out in the world, they would say, well, trying to change the person you in, well, that's getting salvation through works. And that's and that's terrible. Not only that, but even if you try to do that, well, you might just be condemning yourself to hell for even attempting such a thing. It's so backwards, in my opinion. Not that I think you can earn salvation. But my point is that we have to be careful, right? Because people can, in fact, acknowledge that God, according to this story, you can acknowledge that God is sovereign. You can acknowledge that you're in violation of what he wants to do, and that you're a terrible person, and that he's right. And yet that does not really tell you about their...
Right. A lot of people would tell you that about themselves, and they would say, well, I just hope it'll all work out somehow. They'll say, sure, I know I do this, and this, and this, but I'm hoping it'll somehow all work out.
I'm just saying, though, it gets very...
go to hell on the other end.
I'm just saying, though, it gets very tricky, because when you talk about what it is that you have to sign on to in order to be considered converted, whatever you want, saved, whatever you want to say, right? Saved is the common term for what I really consider to be more like conversion. But anyway, that's a whole other topic about verbiage. But I just think that it gets very tricky, and I think that people do not put enough stock into what they're actually talking about.
Well, in defense of those people, they don't just tell you have to admit that you've sinned and God is righteous. You also have to, in their mind, invite Jesus Christ into your life. As they say.
No, you're right. But what does that exactly mean? Besides acknowledging the fact that you're wrong and he's right, what does that exactly mean in their world? Because they're usually not pro the commandments. So what does that actually mean? Besides the acknowledgement what you have to acknowledge is the fact that he had to sacrifice himself on your behalf, I suppose, which obviously Pharaoh wouldn't even have had that opportunity. But he does say that God is punishing and everything, and he wants to stop.
The implication of accepting Christ is that you're going to live differently. But if they don't accept that, that's theologically untenable.
It is untenable, but it is what they often accept, because they would say in order to sign on to anything but that, you're talking about a works-based salvation. I get that all the time.
Well, all right. There's not much you can do about it.
No, and that's why we go. My dad's channel, Christian Commandment Keepers, right? The idea that you can separate the idea of trying, of attempting obedience. Obviously, we're not going to be fully successful, but the idea that we're not striving for obedience is part of the walk, and that's kind of ingrained.
He says that before his arrest. Do what I tell you. You're my friends if you keep my commandments. Look at what he said before his arrest.
I know.
So it's just.
I'm just telling you, okay. It gets very hairy.
Peace. I obviously
But I think this is a good example. This is somebody that's literally almost there. They are so close, and you could see. Obviously he can't invite Jesus in his heart. Jesus hasn't had his ministry yet.
Right,
so what is he supposed to? Based on anything else, I don't know what he's really missing, right? Because because he says, the eternal is in the right, and my people are in the wrong. So he's the only thing he's not doing is he's not making any cultural change.
Well, he's somewhat manipulative too.
Possibly. Now you could argue that. Yeah. You could argue that he's sincere. Just that it's not sincere. That he's just
to be
lying.
Relieved of the problem.
Fair enough. That would be the opt out. The opt out is that he's not even saying this from a genuine place. He ultimately doesn't actually think that God is in the right and he's in the wrong. But I would argue that perhaps he does, and when it says his resolve is hardened, he literally is somebody that is just an incorrigible person that can have everything put in front of him, and he's just not going to budge because he does not want to give up things. He does not want to come under the authority of God.
Well,
he can even acknowledge that in a sense he's right and he's wrong, but he doesn't care.
Well, Cecil B. DeMille in the Ten Commandments, his concept is with the death of his son and the firstborn of Egypt, he kind of reevaluates the situation, and he just wants payback for that. You could say.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's part of the, in other words, this is before the death of the firstborn, where he says this.
Mm-hmm.
After that,
I think there's it's
fires remorse. In other words, he lets it go.
Well, people.
Then he says, "Well, what's going to happen to my country? The slaves have gone. Besides that, they've killed all these people." He gets buyer's remorse.
But people almost talk about, people talk about like the stages of grief or something, and it's kind of a similar thing with like stages of like religious acceptance, right? Because it's almost like he gets to the point where he can intellectualize it, and then it's like he can kind of coexist with it, sort of. But then he gets to the point where it just bothers him so much he just has to destroy it. And that often is what you'll find. People will start out and they're like, oh, okay, well, I'm glad you're such a goody two-shoes, but, whatever, as long as you don't really mess with me. But eventually they just want to kill you for being goody two-shoes because you just disturbed them.
Yeah, okay.
Just your presence bothers
them. Good point, yeah. Good point, yeah.
So I think, he got to the point where it's like, I can't handle this system even coexisting with my system because it bothers me, which essentially would indicate that perhaps, like I said, he's incorrigible. Like he can intellectualize it and everything, and he's just not going to accept. Like I think that's narratively at least what's being presented here is that kind of attitude, right?
So what Alter feels is that it's using very abrupt language, but it shouldn't be read as closely as you normally read it.
What do you mean by that?
In other words, when he says God is
the Lord is in the right, and I and my people are in the wrong.
If a Jew says today Rishayim, he doesn't mean you're incorrect or you're in the wrong. It means you're wicked. When you say
but right and wrong.
Haman is called Haman HaRasha.
But when you say you say that people are in the right and people in the wrong, that doesn't just mean a factual error.
Right. But
I don't think that's not what I got from Robert.
All right, okay.
I got we're morally correct and morally evil.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
But it does kind of water it down the way he words.
Fair enough. What do you have?
God is righteous, and me and my people are wicked.
Yeah, that's probably
my people are wicked.
I think I might like that better. Because what I like about it from a narrative standpoint, like I said, is that the fact that you can have a character, and I want to take them at their word, because it doesn't say he was lying. Let's imagine he's not.
Right.
He literally does know that he's wicked, and he just doesn't care. I think that is a very powerful narrative point that people need to understand. And I think we sometimes lose that the acknowledgement that you are wicked is not enough.
But I respect Robert Alter. What he's saying is the terms come across more strong than maybe they necessarily have to be taken.
He takes it more, like he said, in a legal sense.
Yeah, in a legal sense. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All right. Now, hold on here just a second. So he has an interesting point about the crops. And this actually comes from, he quotes somebody named Umberto Cassuto.
Yeah, Cassuto's a famous commentary.
Yeah.
On the Pentateuch.
There we go. Well, his commentary states that the reason why it says the flax and the barley were struck, but the wheat and the emmer were Well, he says the flax was used to make linen, which was a fabric for clothing, and the barley would have been used for cheap bread to feed slaves. So the specific call out of these crops is referring to, again, attacking the system in a specific sort of ways. It is interesting, though, that it goes out of its way to say that the wheat and the emmer were unripened. I think there's probably more to it than that. I'd be curious to hear more commentary, because it seems like such a weird detail to throw in.
Well, maybe he's saying that God is plaguing them, but still holding back from what he finally does. He's still still giving them a leash,
Right.
a little bit of a leash there, till finally we have the death of the firstborn.
Yeah, this would give you somewhat of a timeline, wouldn't it? Because barley being in bud, it would tell you kind of the time of year it would be too.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Which we know eventually where they end up, right?
The barley harvest.
Because until we get to the 14th, there isn't any date specifically mentioned, right?
Yeah, it's a good point.
Or the 10th day of the first month.
Right, but it's early. It's early spring when the barley. The first harvest is the barley harvest.
Right.
The wheat harvest comes later.
Right. Yeah. So this tells us that we're in the springtime.
We're somewhat south of the land of Israel, but not but we're like the next step down.
Right. Yeah. So this tells us we're in the springtime. The question is
early spring.
Right. The question is how fast did this whole process take? Because was this a whole year from here to the Exodus, or is this the spring leading up to the Exodus, you think?
No, it would have taken a while till you get to here, I think.
Not to here, I'm saying from here to the end.
No, here to the end is not that much time.
Right. So this is, I don't know, this was like probably maybe a month before or something like that, perhaps.
Could be, yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't give you a lot of time. It tells you that the darkness is so many days. It tells you the Nile is so many days, but that's about it. It doesn't really tell you much.
Yeah.
Okay. And ultimately, he keeps kind of...
By the way, the first day of that month is covered because God says to them, this month will be the beginning of your year. So the new moon of the first month is mentioned in Exodus 12.
Yeah. And then ultimately he says, on
the 10th day you take the lamb.
Right.
But actually the first day of the month is there in the beginning.
That's true. Right. And then he says, I will send you out, and then everything leaves, and he reneges again. This is the third time, I think, that's happened.
Yeah, I think so.
It's going to happen again, right? It's not the last time that happens, I don't think, is it?
Well, he hardens his heart, I think 5 times.
But I mean, does he?
10 times
how many times does he promise to go back? I guess we'll find out by the end.
Yeah,
how many times he promises he's going to do it and go back. Because it's kind of interesting.
Right. And then even at the end, he goes after him finally again.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So it never really stops. Ultimately, the only way is through destruction. But again, I think that narratively is true, right? You have people, and they'll often be like, well, we can figure this out, and then they kind of go back, and it's like it's this never ending relationship between God's people and the world, is that things happen, and we do have plagues in a sense because people are immoral, and so it creates problems in society, and it creates issues where they have to deal with it, and there are horrific ramifications, and often God's people are spared of those ramifications because they're not behaving in the same sort of immoral ways, and then that could make people resent you, and it's just this never-ending cycle that just continues to happen. Unfortunately, it's not going to be resolved until the very end when the armies of the world are going to be destroyed, basically, because that's what it's going to take, unfortunately. I know some people are positive eschatologists, but unfortunately, I'm not so much. Although I do think that, again, the right attitude to have is to consider how impactful God's people have to be in order to be threatening, right? The way that this whole story got started was Pharaoh was worried that they could rise up against him. So that has to happen. So we can be very optimistic about that. There is a part of the story where God's people have to be so numerous or influential that the rulers of the world are concerned about us. But then when that happens, it's going to get bad for a little while. And thankfully not very long, but it's going to get bad for a little while, is my opinion. Yeah. So you can still be optimistic in the meantime, because you want to be part of that solution, of course.
Right.
Regardless of the fact that, unfortunately, some negative things are going to have to take place before it's all over. That's my little eschatology for the podcast. So, anyway, any other thoughts? since we're just going off on tangents now?
Well, since you brought up eschatology,
Of course I did.
they were protected in Goshen, and it does.
Yep.
We do see an end time scenario where
Yes.
the church flees to a place of protection.
Another reason to be
But
optimistic,
that's
right?
that I brought up that's a whole other subject that
No, but I mean, I do believe in divine protection for
Right.
people and things. And yes, there's martyrs, but then there's also a lot of people that are
protected.
spared. And
Yeah.
so, yes, right. So
Right.
you can be optimistic about that as well.
Right.
But if you want to say, well, isn't that so, sad to think of all these horrible things happening to
Yeah.
the world? Yes, it is. On the other hand, unfortunately, I just don't know if there's another way. I think this story kind of tells you
Right, those are the labor pains.
that really is not.
The labor pains before the new birth, so to
Right.
speak,
And during this process, look what happens, right? You have the magicians acknowledging God. You have now Pharaoh acknowledging God. It does have positive effect in the midst of all of this.
And
nightmare.
the Israelites.
And the Israelites' faith are strengthened, of course.
Right. They're being prepared for their role in history.
Yeah. Absolutely. All right. So we will see you tomorrow to discuss the next bit of Exodus. We'll continue on with, like I said, special effects section. This is the part of the Ten Commandments that tends to get the higher television ratings because people enjoy the destruction. So we will be talking about that tomorrow.